Let's go ahead. We'll follow the same format as we have over the past few weeks. And, over the past few weeks, we've talked a lot about the nuts and bolts of running a program. We've heard about some of the hot topics and new opportunities for our programs. We've also, taken a look back and kind of celebrated our accomplishments over the last 30 years. And we've also, heard some nice award winners. So it's been a great 3 weeks so far, and I'm excited to start thinking today about how our programs will look over the next 30 years and how we'll continue our work helping small businesses. So to get us started today, I'd like to introduce Paula Hoag, and everybody knows Paula. Paula's our US EPA Asbestos and Small Business Ombudsman. Paula's been a great partner to us as programs over the years. And as she's moved up to her current role, Paula did a little bit of what we're doing now. She took a look back at the past, kind of looked at where her office was at currently and assessed that, and took a look at the future and what her office should look like in the future, especially in terms of her role in working with our programs. So Paula, thanks for joining us, and I'll turn things over to you for an update from your office.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. Let me pull up my presentation or my slides here. Hold on. Can you all see that?
Not yet. We might need Chris to stop sharing. There we go.
Okay, so you can see my slide?
Not yet.
Okay.
We just see you. There we go.
Okay.
Perfect.
All right. All right. Well, great to be here. Thanks, Chris, for that introduction. And I agree. I've been definitely looking back and also looking forward. And I know that today's theme is aspirations. So I want to focus on some of those things as well, because I definitely have been with this program, at least on the EPA side, for quite a while. I actually joined EPA in 2006 and joined the Ombudsman program here in the Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business in 2008. And I believe I've been to almost every single one of these training events, except for one where I think I was, about to have a baby, so I didn't want to fly. But I'm really impressed that even during a pandemic and when we've had to go fully virtual, we've managed to still come together annually. And I think that that's a huge asset to this program and our partnership, that even across the country on a federal and state level, we're still able to work together and try to come up with some solutions to help small businesses. So let me just, All right, so I want to talk a little bit today. Here's just kind of a quick overview, and I hope I don't belabor too much and talk too much. I'm open to taking questions throughout this presentation, because I think I don't want to ramble on too much, but I know that there's some interest in talking about the ASBO monitoring and reporting strategy, which I've worked on for the last year. And in order to do that, I thought it'd be helpful to just give some background to the program. And of course, for those newcomers, just share more about really my role, how it's situated within the agency, and then share some of the work that I've done in trying to really understand my role, because although I've been with the program since 2008, I actually just took on the ombudsman role itself in 2020, about a few weeks prior to the pandemic, where everyone was, sheltering in place. So, it's been tough to try to get my bearings as a program manager and taking leadership of this role during a pandemic. I had my children here at home with me for quite some time. So that's always been fun, but I want to give some clarity of some of the things that I've been doing during this time, getting to better understand the ombudsman role and profession, and talking a little bit about, if you're not familiar with ACUS or ADRA, I'll talk a little bit about that and how that's impacted the work that I've been doing. And then also talk about the specifics to the small business ombudsman role, the historical value, as well as the legal analysis of the small business ombudsman role, specifically within Section 507 of the Clean Air Act, which has then led me to the strategic plan or strategy on how I plan to move forward. So Many of you are probably familiar with this slide. I've shared this quite a bit because I think it's really helpful to understand that this is a unique program. A lot of people don't know always what an ombudsman does, and I'll get into more of that a little bit. But it's also unique at EPA that there's 2 distinct ombudsman requirements in one program. So I'm the EPA Asbestos Ombudsman, which is required under AHERA, as well as the EPA Small Business Ombudsman, which has mandatory or statutory authority under the 1990 Clean Air Act Amendment, Section 507. But it was actually created prior to the 1990 Clean Air Act and was it stemmed from, I think, from the RFA and SBREFA guidance or requirements for the agency. So the Small Business Regulatory Enforcement and Fairness Act had a lot of requirements for agencies that are developing rulemakings and understanding that small businesses needed to have special considerations. So although this role, the Small Business Ombudsman role, wasn't required under SBREFA, it is something that I think EPA created in order to help provide ongoing informal small entity guidance in the rulemaking process. So, the key word being informal. So it's not part of the SPAR panels, those small business panels that go through the rulemaking, but to offer, assistance in questions or answer questions to the small business community for agency rulemaking. And so, like I mentioned, something I refer to ACUS, which is the Administrative Conference of the US. This has been a really pivotal, program report that I've looked at closely. As I mentioned in the past, I've worked with the Coalition of Federal Ombudsmen. I actually just completed a mentorship or menteeship under a FDA mentor of the Ombudsman group there, and really great group that has really gone through and understands what an ombudsman is required to do, especially on the federal ombudsman level. And they are really closely aligned with what's required under the 2016 final report, the ACUS report for the use of ombuds in the federal agencies. And I wasn't actually familiar with ACUS, but it's a federal agency that studies the efficiencies and administrative process here on the federal level to make sure that there's procedural improvements. So it's definitely been a guiding post, a more recent report about how to use federal ombudsmen across the federal government. And one of the big takeaways I got from that was that they really recommend that if you're going to consider yourself an ombudsman, that you need to follow the standards of practice of being considered impartial, independent, and confidential. And so their stress was that if, a lot of times Congress or these federal agencies would create these ombudsman programs, but then didn't actually adhere to some of those professional standards. And so there's confusion, and people don't always know what exactly the ombudsman does. And I've definitely found that to be the case in my role here, not only, throughout the states and your understanding of what my role is, but also even within EPA and just, what is an ombudsman? Why do we use that term versus any other terms, just being considered an advocate or a liaison? There's really distinct ombudsman requirements that, the ACUS report suggests do not use the term ombudsman if you can't adhere to being considered independent, impartial, and confidential. And so that's something that I've really taken to heart and wanted to make sure I was doing that within my role as I really looked at the statutory requirements for both the asbestos ombudsman and small business ombudsman responsibilities. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that, but I think that is a big piece. I do not sit within any of the program offices, so that is helpful. I'm under the Office of the Administrator, in the Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization. And so our intent is to be impartial, which, I try not, even though I say that I'm an advocate for small business, ultimately, I think the better way to say it is I'm an advocate for a fair process for small business. The ombudsman does not necessarily go to bat for a specific small business or a small business ask, as much as just really looking to see, is the agency adhering to its policies and guidance on how it's agreed to work with small business issues, to make special considerations on small business issues, and not necessarily as an ombudsman. I don't fix those problems, but I can help work through a dispute resolution process. And that's why I have here the reference to ADRA, or the 1996 Alternative Dispute Resolution Act, which is something our Office of General Counsel, we have a conflict prevention and resolution center, and they strongly do support the ADR process. And actually in the ADRA, it does say that there's any procedure that uses to resolve issues in controversy, including but not limited to facilitation, mediation, arbitration, as well as the use of an ombuds. And so I'd like to bring that up because that has been a question within my program is, what is the intent of this ombudsman role? Can I really offer confidentiality? I have, in working with small businesses that have contacted me a couple of times, I've had our EPA enforcement office really want to even ask for my records on a small business. And I've wanted to really make sure I can protect not just that business specifically, but really protect the role so that we can be considered a safe place for small businesses to come and share their questions, concerns, grievances without any concern of being retaliated against or some sort of negative response, and that they can be honest with maybe, concerns or things they know they aren't doing properly. And that's the way that we can kind of help really work through some of these challenges and air some of those, I guess, dirty laundry, if you will, so that we can get through some of these problems. So I kind of give all that context to help you understand that, I've done some significant training and mentorship to try to learn more about the federal ombudsman role. And that in that, it's helped me to take a closer look at the historical perspective of the small business ombudsman role with regards to the 507 program, as well as getting a legal analysis from our attorneys here at EPA of my specific small business ombudsman role within the Clean Air Act. And so, some of the things that I've learned in digging up through the various guidance and statute and congressional legislative history is that, from my perspective, looking back now, I think that there are some limitations and even incomplete reporting or agency guidance in reference to the program. And maybe that's one of those things that, like, hindsight is 2020. And I certainly know building up this program from scratch in the 90s was no easy feat. So I think it makes sense to reflect back and say, okay, that was then, this is now, how can we move forward and improve? And so with that, honestly, having this introspective look at my role did stem from some questions or concerns that came up in the States and then kind of filtered up to me and saying, hey, how are you going to fix that? How is the small business ombudsman going to fix this? Or what do you want to do with this? And I really had to think about that and kind of push back on that question, because again, I'm looking at, well, what is my role? Not necessarily what I would like to do or what I think should be done, but where's my lane? And what is the intent behind the ombudsman? Because like I said, we could use any title for this program, but it's specifically ombudsman. And so I think I wanted to just clarify that I think in the past, perhaps things were done by the Small Business Ombudsman Office as a champion of the state programs and all the great work that you do. But is that really the intent, at least based on the statutory requirements and on the general federal ombudsman perspective or expectations? And I think that ultimately, in really dissecting the statute, we see that there are some 507B under the statute program requirements that have been assumed to be the small business ombudsman role, which is 507D. And so that'll come up and be probably more clear as you guys get to look at the strategy that I've put together. But ultimately, the legal analysis that I received was that one, the SBO requirements, the Small Business Ombudsman's authority is solely within Section 507D of the Clean Air Act. So where it says D, monitoring, that is the complete and ultimate statutory authority for the ombudsman. And then a big departure from what was previously done is that the Small Business Ombudsman in the past would monitor and report on the states, on the state adherence to the programs, right? That is actually based on my understanding of the rule, the statute, as well as our attorneys and their evaluation of the statute, is really the SBO is to be monitoring the federal program, 507B, meaning that EPA has a role here. And it's not that it's solely onto the Small Business Ombudsman. The Small Business Ombudsman is to monitor the federal program. And so in a way, we do that by better understanding what's going on in the states and how what we're doing here at EPA is impacting and reflecting on how well the states are able to maintain and carry on with their programs. And then lastly, the Congress did definitely offer flexibility in how we carry out our roles, both in the states, the federal program, as well as my role as the ombudsman. There's a lot of room for flexibility and interpretation. And so, where that was available, I wanted to offer more clarification in how I thought we should move forward in this ASBO monitoring and reporting strategy. So the monitoring and reporting strategy is something, like I said, I've been working on for the last year. It came about and to better clarify my roles and responsibilities, both on the asbestos ombudsman side and the small business ombudsman side, both for in the small business ombudsman role, not just the Clean Air Act 507 requirements, but also under the RFA or like informal guidance for all regulatory small business guidance. And so I really wanted to kind of capture everything that my role is responsible for and how I was going to move forward with that, because a big piece of the ombudsman role is to take in information, complaints, concerns, and then make periodic reporting or recommendations. And that is something specified both in AHERA and the Clean Air Act to have some sort of reporting, advisory opinion, and or recommendations that should be periodically made. And also, I just wanted to make sure that this strategy fit kind of, closing the loop of communication, because we're getting calls and questions and concerns. And then how do we share that with everyone? How do we not only kind of explain what our program does and the volume and type of calls that we're getting, but also, draw areas of concern that maybe as an agency we need to take a closer look at, or how can we resolve some of these things that seem to be systemic problems stemming from the questions and concerns that we're hearing. But also lastly, as a final objective, to really make sure I'm meeting the objectives as a federal ombudsman, meeting those professional standards, because I think ultimately those do help our constituents, which is of course the small business community, you all indirectly, but of course our ultimate goal for everybody is to support the small businesses and ensuring that they're complying with our environmental goals and regulations. So I think, tying that all together in a strategy and moving forward with that is really crucial. You all in the states, at least on the National Steering Committee level, did get a chance to review the straw man or framework, and that has now been finalized, and it's in its current final senior agency review, and I expect to have that complete in the next few days. Well, probably maybe a few weeks, honestly, but when I do have that, I will share that with the NSC as a courtesy copy to share with you all the final product of that strategy. So that was pretty much it. Oops. I hope that's helpful. I'm sure there might be questions, and I just want to quickly shout out to my staff that work on the hotline, as well as EPA staff that help make sure we have all these communication materials, and supporting the grant and things like that, that this is definitely not a one-man show, even though I'm here kind of sharing some of the Ombudsman goals. It's a program where we're all here to support the community and small businesses that reach out to us for assistance. And then of course, in partnering with you all. So I just want to say thank you to my staff and thank you to all those that have put this training event together. So I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone might have.
Thank you, Paula. There is a question in the chat from Tony. You can probably see it there, but it says, are there any documents from the early days of the program that speak to the original role and responsibilities? Did the SBO do a report after her first year in office?
That is a good question. I have not seen or found that, honestly. I mean, we did do a dive into finding, you know, previous Ombudsman newsletters and Ombudsman reports. I have seen some of the early reports that did focus on the state programs rather than on the federal program. But, you know, as we look through the legal requirements or the statute language, it does really seem that I can only say or guess what was happening in the 1990s when they were trying to figure out how to actually make this process go forward. I've never been able to find any kind of planning or strategy document that Karen Brown, as the Ombudsman, had made at that time. All we can kind of see is those formal documents that had been put out to the public.
Okay, thank you. And then another question says, can you share a couple of examples, actual examples of how you have acted as ombudsman? I say person, ombudsman, ombudsperson. Let me see, I just lost my question there. There we go. I liked the overview, the overall overview, but I am wondering if you could give us a little deeper view of something you or your staff have done so we can understand your role better. Also, we have heard there may be audits of state programs. Is that something that should be going on or going to be happening?
Yeah, so as far as previous work that we have done, I was going to pull up, unfortunately, I can't scroll around here on my at my, the top here has got the bar, so I can't show you some of the things that we've worked on, but we've pulled together a charter over the last year to really clarify the roles and responsibilities of the program on a very high level. And with that, we created some external guidance documents and trifolds and some things just to help really kind of get the program out there a little bit more, refreshed, do a little like facelift. But also, you know, so the grant was another big thing that we had to renew the grant process. And of course, we've been really lucky to have Kansas State University as our grantee. It's been awesome. But a lot of the work, the funding and support for that grant helps to make sure that there's funding for the national website and this training event, as well as ongoing collaborative resources and assistance. So we do have some of those ties there to try to, you know, help on a federal level maintain and keep communication going throughout the state programs. But also day to day, we take in hotline calls, and I do work with small businesses that contact me when they're getting an enforcement letter and or you know, questions from our enforcement office about a rulemaking or you know, a regulation that they haven't adhered to and how they can move forward. So we do work directly with small businesses that contact us as well. And as far as the audit process, I am not familiar with that. I'd love to hear more about that because I'm not aware of any effort here at the EPA level to start to audit those state programs.
I think that was a discussion point, if I remember right, on the NSC a couple of years ago, maybe when you first started this process, but perhaps it, was clarified as you began to jump into your role. That's how I vaguely remember it. We were thinking there were going to be audits, but
I feel like there might have been some interest. I know we, as a grant, we have to do audits, and maybe there was like, oh, this could be interesting to do an audit for the state programs. I want to say that might have been pre my coming into my role. Yeah, I do kind of remember something about that, but no, we haven't looked closer at that. Not to say that that isn't an option, but at this time as the ombudsman, and I feel like there's a lot of foundational work that needed to be done, as I've taken on the role that I've been more focused on.
okay. So Samantha says, I am so thankful for this presentation as I've struggled at times to define my role as a state SBO.
Yeah.
Should state SBOs be trying to align program structure with what you've done with the federal office, or do you think there will be some variety in the implementation across states?
I think there'll definitely be variety, and I think that's why that ACUS report on the federal ombuds was so important, and they did a lot of investigating about how these different ombudsman programs are set up throughout the federal government. And I think there was that need to say, let's get some alignment here with the ombudsman profession. It's too loosey-goosey all over the map. It's kind of whatever anybody wants to make it. And it wasn't helpful because, I can speak personally to this. There was a lot of folks assuming there was expectations of me that I knew were not, it's not a catch-all responsibility. There really needs to be clarity on, this is my role and these are the parameters in my lane that I need to stay within. And if nothing else, so that you don't overshadow and it's assumed that you're to do other things that really other folks within your organization need to be doing, and that they have the true authority to do. Whereas the ombudsman role, usually doesn't have the authority to make definitive changes to say policy, or doesn't have the funding that some of these other program offices do that can really make some of those impactful changes. So the ombudsman, a lot of times I have seen, at least in this context, I need to kind of step back and be more involved with how do I really situate myself within my organization here at EPA and help them come forward within the agency to step up to small business assistance. Just like I think we had a previous speaker that from the Office of Environmental Justice, and the assumption, is, oh, the OEJ office does the EJ stuff. No, they're there to help the agency get, to understand EJ and do that throughout the government or the EPA. Same here. I want to make sure I'm doing my job to work internally within the organization so that there's a small business assistance culture here versus it all coming from just within my office. Okay. And I think you all can do that in the States too.
And so I know we're going to have to be wrapping up this session soon. So, and really this has been great information, Paula. I know one of the things that you asked or you mentioned was funding for the K-State programs. I think a lot of times questions come up, currently and in the future. Does your office have funding to help state programs so that they can stay afloat?
Right. So that's a common question that comes up. And I think that goes back to, I want to encourage within EPA an interest in them developing and working with your state programs on small business. My office has very limited resources and funding. We will continue to support the grant that provides the national website, this training event, and other collaborative resources. And perhaps we can, think about some additional opportunities within that realm. Unfortunately, we don't have direct funding to, kind of keep afloat the state programs. But again, I think my role is to help kind of highlight some of the challenges that you all are facing and understanding there are some serious funding issues that you all have had. And I think that does reflect kind of back to EPA and how we could maybe be doing things better to make sure that your state leadership really do value your programs and are going to make sure that there's the proper funding there for you all.
Terrific. Thank you. And, you know, it kind of goes along the next question I had. Just, you know, our today's theme is, you know, aspirations and thinking about the next 30 years. Do you have specific aspirations for the Ombudsman's program and your role under 507?
Honestly, I do think that over the years, over 30 years, which is such a long time, we've gotten a little bit off track. I think we can kind of see that in how a lot of the states have struggled to kind of keep their programs afloat and continuing. And so my goal is to try to get us back onto the road where we're going to know these programs are going to stay and be maintained and maybe built back up if necessary. And again, by working closely within EPA to make sure that there's enough support and understanding for what important role you all do, so that it's not going to just have to come from the Ombudsman, that it's going to be part of the culture here at EPA.
Okay, great. That's a big help for all of us, I know. So thank you. And I guess let me thank you too, just again, for joining us this morning and giving us your presentation and your update, because I think it's really important information, and you're just really a key vital partner for us as we go forward. You always have been and always will be.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the chance to come and talk to you all today. Thanks.
And Chris, but not to interrupt, but just to let Paula know, there are about 4 more questions in the chat. So maybe if you could just try to answer those to the whole group, that would be super helpful, and we'll have a record of that then.
Yep, no problem.
Thank you.